Backhands are by far one of the hardest shots to master in pickleball. So today, I'm gonna take you through everything that you need to know to take your backhand from a weakness to a strength. The problem is, 90% of players don't have the right technique on their backhand. And without this, improving the shot is nearly impossible. So I highly encourage you to watch this full video as a checklist to see what might be causing your backhand issues. Helping me today, I have my sister Kennedy. Before we get into all the technique, I want to show you the different types of backhands because the technique between them varies a lot. So the first backhand we need to go over is the drive, where we're hitting low and hard. And generally you want to hit the shot with topspin. So most players from the back of the court use their forehand when they drive, but if you can do it on your backhand, that saves you from having to run around it and hit a forehand like this. The next shot I want to cover is the slice or the chip, which you primarily use on the return. So from the back of the court, you don't really want to use this shot if it's not on the return, but it's super important because you start off a lot of points with that, and you don't want to have to return every single ball with your forehand. The last shot I want to cover on the backhand is the drop, which I'm sure you know. Generally, you hit a one-handed backhand drop with slice like this. It's a very simple motion, but you need to understand the technique if you want to be consistent with it. And lastly, we're going to cover the two-handed backhand, which a lot of high-level players prefer, so stick around if you want to see that. To start, I'm going to take you through the general technique for each type of backhand. Then after that, I'm going to take you through the top 5 mistakes that are probably holding you back that you need to fix. So stick around. And guys, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel. So on the one-handed backhand drive, it all starts with how you're holding the paddle, and the grip that you want to have for the shot is called the high continental. So if you don't have this grip, it's going to be really hard to hit the shot effectively. I'm going to show you a close-up on that grip in the mistakes section, so stay tuned for that. But the next part of the swing is what we call the take back. And this is where a lot of players get things wrong. On the take back on a one-handed backhand, you want to make sure that your paddle is pointing straight behind you. So you want to get like this with the paddle pointing straight behind you. And you'll notice I'm also standing sideways. So when I'm about to hit a one-handed backhand, ideally I want to be sideways to the net like I'm on a surfboard. So this is the position you want to get into before you hit your one-handed backhand, okay? And from this position, this is where you're going to move to the ball. So, right? I get sideways and then I move to the ball. You don't want to be moving to the ball facing the net. That's a big mistake players make. The second you see it's a backhand, you turn sideways, point that paddle back. Now you're ready to swing into the ball. So after we're in this position and we're ready to hit the ball, the next step is to rotate our shoulders and hips to make contact with the ball out in front to the side of our body. So what that looks like is this. And you'll notice when I hit the ball, my arm is nearly straight, but it's slightly bent. So you don't want your arm to be completely straight, but you don't want it to be very bent. You want it to be just a little bit bent before it's straight. And you want to try to hit the ball in the same spot every time. And that comes from your footwork. So when I get the ball fed to me, I move my feet to catch the ball right here. So that's going to make you a lot more consistent if you're hitting the ball in the same spot every single time. And after you hit the shot, you want to finish out in front around right here. You don't want to go over your shoulder. You want to finish with the paddle a little bit above where you hit the ball. You don't want to flail like this and do what I call over-rotating. So when you hit the shot, your shoulder should go from sideways to facing the net. You shouldn't do like this and flail. That's where, if you do that, you're going to lose all of your control and you're going to hit too hard and you're not going to be able to keep the ball low like you want. So to show you a good example, that's what you want your one-handed backhand to look like. On a chip, you're usually hitting the shot on a return. So on a return, you're actually generally running through the shot as you hit it. So you don't necessarily need to turn your shoulders as much here. Here, you're doing more of a blocking motion as you're moving forward. So I turn my shoulders a little bit, but my motion is very compact. I have a continental grip. And I'm really just going from here to here. So you don't want to have a big swing. It's really just right here. So there's not much going on with the technique of this shot. And by keeping it simple, that's actually how you stay consistent. So you want to be very simple on your chip. On your one-handed backhand drop, just like on your drive, you want to turn sideways with your feet and your shoulders, but the motion is very compact. So I'm really just drawing a line forward in a very compact way. So when I say drawing a line, all I mean is I'm not rotating around my body with the swing. I'm going perfectly straight, and then the whole swing takes place on this side of my body. So I have my continental grip, and I'm cupping under the ball while drawing that line forward. So to show you a few more, just like this. So it's a very simple motion, like that. And while understanding the techniques of the backhands we just went through is important, you have to practice in order to actually make them improve. So later in the video, we're going to go over the top 3 ways to practice each of those techniques. So stick around if you want to see that. But before we go into that, I need to make sure that you're not making one of the top 5 biggest backhand mistakes, because if you are, it's going to prevent you from improving no matter how hard you practice. So the biggest mistake that players make on their one-handed backhands is they have the wrong grip. So the grip that you want to have on your chips and on your drops is the continental, where this knuckle on my index finger is in line with this angled notch on the paddle. So if you look at the paddle, we've got the big notch in the center. You want your knuckle to be in line with the angled one right to the side of it. So that is a continental grip, which a lot of people say is like you're shaking someone's hand. So it should be easy to make the paddle face perfectly up or down with this grip. On your drive, you want to have a high continental, which is just a continental a little bit more towards this side notch. So you don't want to be fully on the side notch. You want to be a little bit more towards the side notch than on your drop or drive, and that'll let you get topspin on your drives. What you definitely don't want to do is sit with a Western grip where you're leading with the front part of your hand. I see a lot of beginners doing this. It might be easier to start off, but it's going to prevent you from improving, and you'll never be able to hit any topspin. So make sure you're leading with the back part of your hand, and you should only be able to do that if you have the right grip. So get the right grip and lead with the back part of your hand. And guys, if you like that explanation, make sure to hit the like button. I'm really curious to see how many of you already have the right grip or not. The second biggest mistake that players make on their backhands is they don't turn their shoulders and they fully arm the ball. So if you don't turn, it looks like this. And this might be more natural to you in the beginning, just not turning and arming the ball. But as I showed you earlier, what you want to do is turn your shoulders and hips so that you're sideways. And on a drive, you want to really rotate through the ball and use that as one of your main sources of power. You also don't want to be using your elbow for power. So when I don't turn, I kind of need to fling it with my elbow. You want your rotation and your shoulder to be the main source of power. Your elbow should stay pretty still throughout the motion. So this is a good example. I turn my shoulders and use my rotation for power. And this is a bad example. I'm open to the court and I'm using my arm for power. So this tip applies mainly to the drive, but it's also important on our drops that we turn so that we're not hitting the ball with our arm. We want to be using our body and our shoulder. And the next biggest mistake that players make is they hit the ball with too bent of an arm. So this doesn't always mean that you're not turning, but a lot of time players are just hitting the ball too close to their body or too out in front. Remember, you want to hit the ball with a nearly straight arm. And this applies to all the backhands that we've talked about. And the reason for this is it gives you the ability to extend through the ball. So your goal when you see one of these shots coming is to get yourself into a position where you can get the same contact point every single time. So you see there, the ball came at me. I got out of the way quickly so I could make contact with the ball here with a nearly straight arm. You don't want to be hitting the ball like this if you don't need to. So this is something you might be able to get away with on your volleys. A lot of time you guard your body with a backhand volley like this, but on a ground stroke or a drive, you want to try your best to get it out to your side, out in front, so that your arm is not too bent. And the fourth mistake that players make on their drives particularly is they over-rotate. So when you're hitting your backhand drive, you don't want to rotate until you hit the ball. So if I slow motion it, I hit the ball, then I rotate. So I don't want to be rotating like this as I'm hitting the ball. My arm should start the swing, and then my shoulders should follow. On drops and chips, you don't want to rotate your shoulders at all. So I'm pretty much completely stable in terms of my rotation when I'm hitting this shot. The last mistake that players make is they only try to use their forehands no matter what. So a lot of time you see players getting way off the court because they're trying to use their forehand over their backhand. And this is fine to a certain extent, but if you want your backhand to improve, you're gonna need to force yourself to start using it eventually. So after you get all this technique right, I challenge you sometimes to try backhands in games. You might not win, but it's totally fine because in the long run, you'll be a way better player because you'll have trained your backhand in actual games. So in terms of practicing all these shots to get better, you need to know the right drills to where you can work on your technique. So starting off with the drive, if you're new to the technique of the drive, one of the best ways to get started is literally just dropping the ball to yourself. We call this drop feeds. And by doing this, you can just get used to holding the ball with a different grip or doing a take back or turning, right? So this is a great way to just isolate the technique by dropping the ball to yourself. You can also do this on a wall if you want to progress a little bit more, or a dink master, of course, where you can get a little bit more of a rally feel. And as you see, you can also get the drop technique down like this too. This is a great way to start off if you're new to this backhand technique. If you're changing from something completely different, it might be really hard to get the hang of it. So if that sounds like you, highly advise starting off with this. And once you start getting more comfortable with the technique, the best way to practice the drive specifically is with one player back, one player up. All we're doing is having a rally where the person that's back is trying to work on getting that one-handed backhand technique down. She's not hitting super hard. She's just fine-tuning everything and working on her footwork so that the backhand starts feeling smooth. So Kennedy actually has a two-handed backhand, which we're going to cover at the end of the video, like I mentioned. So if she was trying to learn a one-hander, this is the drill that she would do to get that technique down. And the best drill to work on drops is very similar. We're going to be doing a down the line rally, but Kennedy is actually starting off a little bit closer to me. So you'll notice Kennedy's about halfway between the kitchen line and the baseline. If you're not comfortable with your drop technique, this is a good way to start. But as you get more comfortable throughout the rally, you can actually start to back up so that you're at the baseline. So if you see, Kennedy's a very advanced player, so for her, it's easier for her to be consistent in this drill, but it's totally okay if when you're starting out, you're not as consistent. That's why we're practicing it, right? So if you're missing half of them and the rallies aren't very long, totally fine when you're getting started. Eventually, if you keep doing this drill, your goal should be to become very consistent with it. So my shots aren't very difficult, but Kennedy is able to make almost all of her drops in. And that is the end goal if you do this drill over time. Practice the chip. The best way to do this is off of one of your friend's serves. So all you need to do is get your friend to start serving towards your backhand, and you can practice this technique pretty easily whenever you come to the courts. So just like that. So all these drills are super simple. It's really just repetition and your attention to detail that are going to make the biggest difference. So when you come out to do them, make sure you're focusing super hard on your technique, and that's where the progress will start to come. Now, guys, we're going to go through the two-handed backhand where the technique is super specific and important, so pay close attention. And if you're coming from a tennis background or you just really don't like the one-handed backhand, you're probably going to like the two-handed backhand more. So a lot of the best players use the two-handed backhand, and it might be because they came from tennis, but at the high level, most players are using this, so make sure you understand it so you can at least try it out. So two-handed backhands look like this for reference, and that is a drive. Generally, you're using the shot on a drive. Sometimes people use it on their volleys too, but today we're going to focus on the drive technique. The most important part of getting the two-handed backhand down is having the right grip. So in terms of our grip, if you're a righty, you want to have the continental grip on your right hand. So it's actually the same grip with your right hand as we had for our chips and our drops. You want to have that continental grip, but your left hand is where things get a little trickier. And here, you actually want to have your finger on the face of the paddle. So unless your paddle grip is long enough, you want your finger to be on there like this. A lot of players do two fingers on the paddle too. If your grip, it is actually long enough to support both your hands though, what you want to have is called an Eastern grip. And what that is where your index knuckle is just in the center of the paddle on this big notch. So by putting your finger on the face like that, that actually gives you an Eastern grip. So either you're having it right here or with the fingers on the paddle face. So in terms of the swing, it all starts just like our one-handed drive where we turn our shoulders and hips and we take our paddle back. So I like to tell players to take their paddle straight back to where it's pointing directly behind them like this. This is where you start, and this is where you move to the ball. So depending on where the ball is coming, Kennedy's gonna move in this position, then she's gonna swing through. The turn on the two-hander though is very important because you don't have as much of an ability to arm the ball. So you really need to make sure that you're turned so that you can get enough load before you rotate through the ball, which is the next step. So after you're in that position with your paddle back, you need to rotate your shoulders and hips through the ball to make contact with it. A similar spot to our one-hander, out in front to the side of our body. So to show you what that looks like, Kennedy has her paddle back and she makes contact with it there. And after she makes contact with it, she's going to follow through high in front of her. So full motion looks like that. So Kennedy is following through high in front of her body. Some players like to follow through over their shoulder like Kennedy did there. So to show you what two-handed backhands look like in a rally, take my paddle back and rotate through the ball. As I mentioned, this shot is not going to be for everyone. but for some, this might be the answer to making your backhands a lot better. One really important thing to think about is when I'm hitting the shot, I'm using my left arm as the primary source of power. If you're using your inside arm too much, it's gonna be really hard to hit the shot effectively. So a cool way to practice that is just by hitting lefty with that same grip that you have on the two-hander. So it's a nice little way to get the hang of using your non-dominant arm on a stroke. And guys, last thing I wanna say, remember, if you want to improve your backhand, practice is the main thing you need to consider. But if you don't have the right technique, your practice won't take you far. So before you start practicing, make sure you have a solid foundation, then get going with the drills. And if you wanna get into the technique of the serve, watch this.